The Tale of Le Tour. We can't tell this story without starting at the Tour's inception. It came about at a time of fierce competition between two rival sports newspapers in France, Le Vélo and L'Auto. In 1903 it was Le Vélo that had market dominance, selling over 80,000 copies daily. L'Auto was set up in 1899 and sold significantly fewer papers than Le Vélo, a more established paper. L'Auto hired and appointed Henri Desgrange as the editor. He was a passionate cyclist, owning the once Parc des Princes velodrome, now home to PSG Football Club. In 1902 there was a crisis meeting due to stagnating and much lower sales than rival paper Le Vélo. Last to speak at the meeting was Géo Lefèvre, the 26-year-old cycling journalist who was poached by Henri. Lefèvre suggested a 6-day race of the sort popular on the track but all around France. L'Auto announced the race on the 19th of January 1903. The first edition of the Tour was on the 1st of July 1903 and was only 6 stages, but the distance more than made up for the lack of stages. They averaged around 404 kilometers in length. Starting in Paris, riders would stop in Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, Bordeaux, and Nantes, before returning to Paris. To enter the first edition the entry fee was 20 francs, which was too much for most, resulting in just 15 riders registered. To encourage more riders the race organizer offered a daily allowance, around the average daily working rate at the time, providing they averaged 20 km per hour for all stages. In addition to reducing the fee from 20 to 10 francs. The winner earning the equivalent to 6 times what most workers would earn in a year. This encouraged between 60 and 80 professional and amateur riders. The stage was set and the actors cast. It was time to take on stage 1 of the Tour. The inaugural stage of the Tour de France was 467 kilometers, 290 miles, departing Paris at 3:16 p.m. The route headed south. The riders had raced through the evening and night, to arrive in Lyon at about 9 a.m. on the following day. 17 hours 45 minutes and 13 seconds was the winning time set by Maurice Garin. The yellow jersey for the leader in the general classification had not yet been introduced, but the leader was identified by a green armband. Due to the extreme physical effort that the Tour demanded, a large number of riders dropped out, leaving only 24 to contest the final 2 stages. The race finished on the edge of Paris, before a ceremonial ride into the city and several laps of the Parc des Princes, Henri's velodrome. Maurice Garin won not only the first but also the last 2 stages, at 25.68 km per hour, 15.96 miles per hour, winning the inaugural Tour de France. The last rider, Milocco, finished 64 hours 47 minutes and 22 seconds behind him. To ensure that the riders rode the entire route, stewards were stationed at various points around the course. Despite the best efforts of the stewards, by the very next edition cheating was rife. Riders were reportedly punched by rival supporters, whilst the eventual race winner Maurice Garin would be disqualified. The race was a shambles and Henri had had enough. He wanted to cancel the Tour for good. Counter-cheating rules introduced. His frustration was short-lived, however he was back to planning the 1905 Tour by spring, this time with more substantial rules to counter cheating, including only riding in daylight so that cheating was more easily spotted. The number of stages was increased from 6 to 11, remaining long in distance. Desgrange said his ideal race would be so hard that only one rider would make it to Paris. From 1910 mountain stages were gradually added whilst the stages were shortened. As for equipment, Henri was very particular about what he allowed riders to do and ride. Until 1930 he demanded riders ride fully self-supported, having to repair their bikes without any outside assistance, and that they must use the same bike from start to finish. He also disallowed the use of multiple gears and metal-rimmed wheels. L'Auto was taken over by a consortium of Germans, who published favorable comments towards the occupying Nazis. After the war, the new government of Free France disbanded every single publication that had worked during the occupation. In 1944, they were able to relaunch under the name of L'Equipe. France's biggest sports publication to this day, who were allowed to organize the 1947 Tour de France. The Tour under new management. The number of stages were increased to between 20 and 25 stages. Whilst 1953 saw the introduction of the green jersey points competition. First doping case in the Tour. In 1967, 1 kilometer from the summit of Mount Ventoux, Tom Simpson suffered a heart failure. French authorities confirmed that Simpson had traces of amphetamine in his body, impairing his judgment and allowing him to push his body beyond its limit. The official cause of death was heart failure caused by exhaustion. Riders went on strike, and the Union Cycliste Internationale introduced limits to daily and overall distances, imposed rest days, and tests were introduced for riders. In the early 1970s, the race was dominated by Eddy Merckx, who won the general classification 5 times, the mountains classification twice, the points classification 3 times, and posted a record of 34 stage victories. In 1975, the polka dot jersey was introduced for the winner of the mountains classification. From the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, the Tour was dominated by Frenchman Bernard Hinault, who would become the third rider to win 5 times. In the 1986 race, Greg LeMond of the United States became the first non-European winner. The doping era. From 1988, a drug was being used pervasively within the peloton, undetectable by drug tests at the time. The drug was erythropoietin, otherwise known as EPO. Pedro Delgado won the 1988 Tour de France, and in 1989 and 1990 LeMond returned from injury and won back-to-back tours, with the 1989 edition still standing as the closest two-way battle in TDF history. The early 1990s was dominated by Spaniard Miguel Indurain, who became such an exceptional time trialist that it didn't even matter that many top-level riders were experimenting with EPO. He won the time trials by such dominating margins that virtually nobody could compete with him, and as a result he became the first rider to win 5 tours in a row. The influx of more international riders continued through this period. In 1996 and 1997 the race was won for the first time by a rider from Denmark, Bjarne Riis, who ended Miguel Indurain's reign with an attack on Houtekam, and the following year the first German rider to win, Jan Ullrich. During the 1998 Tour de France, a doping scandal known as the Festina affair shook the sport to its core when it became apparent that there was systematic doping going on. Numerous riders and a handful of teams were either thrown out of the race, or left of their own free will, and in the end Marco Pantani survived to win first and only Tour in a much reduced field. The 1999 Tour de France, otherwise known as the Tour of Renewal, as the sport tried to clean up its image. In retrospect, 1999 was just the beginning of the doping problem getting much, much worse. Following Armstrong's retirement in 2005, the 2006 edition saw his former teammate Floyd Landis win the Tour. Not long after the Tour was over, however, Landis was accused of doping and had his win revoked. Over the next few years, a young Alberto Contador got his chance in the Tour. During the 2007 edition, Danish rider, Michael Rasmussen, was in the Maillot jaune late in the Tour, in position to win, when his own team sacked him for a possible doping infraction. This allowed the rising star Contador to ride mistake-free for the remaining stages to win his first. In 2011, Cadel Evans became the first Australian to win the Tour. The 2012 Tour de France was won by the first British rider to ever win the Tour, Bradley Wiggins. Overshadowing the entire sport at this time, however, was the Lance Armstrong doping case, which finally revealed much of the truth about doping in cycling. As a result, the UCI decided that each of Armstrong's 7 wins would be revoked. An investigation by the French government into doping in cycling revealed that way back during the 1998 Tour, close to 90% of the riders who were tested, retroactively tested positive for EPO. The result of these doping scandals being that in the case of Landis in 2006, and Contador in 2010, new winners were declared in Oscar Pereiro and Andy Schleck, respectively. However, in the case of the 7 tours revoked from Armstrong, there was no alternate winner named. In 2014, Italian rider Vincenzo Nibali won, making him only the second Italian rider to win the race since the 1960s. Team Sky would dominate the peloton for years. Froome would win 3 tours in a row, followed by Geraint Thomas, and the first Colombian to win the Tour in Egan Bernal. It wasn't until 2020 their string of victories was officially broken by Tadej Pogačar of UAE Team Emirates, making him the second rider from Slovenia to wear the yellow jersey after Primož Roglič that same year, and the first to win it. Pogačar also became the first rider since Eddy Merckx in 1972 to win 3 jerseys in a single tour. The 2020 Tour was postponed due to COVID, commencing on the 29th of August. This was the first time since the end of World War II that the Tour de France was not held in the month of July. Pogačar repeated his overall victory in 2021. He also won the mountains and young rider classifications again, thus winning 3 distinctive jerseys in consecutive years. This victory made him the youngest rider to achieve 2 Tour victories. Sprinter Mark Cavendish also tied the record of Eddy Merckx for all-time stage wins with 34 in 2021. The 2022 Tour saw Jonas Vingegaard win the Tour and become the second Danish winner of the race, ending Pogacar's winning streak. Who do you think will win the next Tour? Have your say in the comments. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe.